What happens when Hollywood's toughest actor walks into the lion's den of daytime television and completely dismantles one of its most outspoken hosts? Today, we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left Joy Behar so humiliated she walked away from The View forever. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is the moment when Tom Hardy's razor-sharp wit met Joy's relentless interruptions, and the results were absolutely devastating. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrities who can't handle being challenged. Now, let's get into what really happened when these two titans clashed. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday morning as Tom Hardy settled into the familiar guest chair of The View. The legendary British actor, known for his intense performances in films like Mad Max and The Dark Knight Rises, had agreed to appear on the show to promote his latest project. What nobody expected was that this routine promotional appearance would turn into television history. Joy Behar, sitting in her usual spot at the panel, had that familiar glint in her eye that regular viewers knew all too well. She'd been doing her homework on Hardy, digging up old interviews and controversial quotes, preparing what she clearly thought would be another one of her signature takedown sessions. The other hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and the rest of the panel seemed to sense the tension building even before the cameras started rolling. So, Tom Joy began with that condescending smile she reserved for guests she planned to interrogate. Let's talk about your comments regarding method acting. You've said some pretty intense things about how far actors should go for their craft. Don't you think that's just a fancy way of saying actors should be allowed to behave badly? Hardy leaned back slightly, his piercing blue eyes studying Joy with the same intensity he brought to his most demanding roles. There was a pause just long enough to make everyone in the studio hold their breath before he responded in that distinctive growly voice. Well, Joy, I think there's a difference between commitment to craft and behaving badly. Though I suspect you might not see the distinction. Method acting requires discipline, research, and respect for the process. It's not about throwing tantrums or making excuses for poor behavior, which seems to be what you're implying. The other hosts exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual celebrity softball interview they were accustomed to. Hardy had just politely but firmly pushed back against Joy's loaded question, and everyone could feel the atmosphere in the studio shift. Joy's smile faltered for just a moment before she doubled down, her voice taking on that sharp edge that had made her famous for confrontational interviews. Oh, please, Tom. We've all heard the stories about actors who claim they're in character when they're really just being difficult. Surely you can admit that some of this method acting stuff is just pretentious nonsense. Pretentious nonsense. Hardy repeated slowly, his accent making each word sound more deliberate and cutting. That's an interesting perspective from someone who's made a career out of offering opinions on subjects they've never actually experienced. Tell me, Joy, what's your background in performance? What gives you the authority to dismiss the techniques that actors have used successfully for decades? The studio fell silent except for the low hum of the cameras. Joy's face flushed red, clearly not expecting to be questioned about her own credentials. She was used to being the one asking the tough questions, not having to defend her positions. I've been in this business for over 20 years, Joy shot back, her voice rising slightly. I think I know a thing or two about what's real and what's just actors being self-indulgent. 20 years of what exactly? Hardy asked with genuine curiosity that somehow made the question even more devastating. 20 years of sitting behind a desk offering commentary, because unless I'm mistaken, your performance experience is rather limited, isn't it? I mean, you've done some comedy, some hosting, but you've never actually had to transform yourself completely for a role, have you? Whoopi tried to step in, sensing that things were getting uncomfortable. Now let's not. But Joy cut her off, her pride clearly wounded. I don't need to have climbed Mount Everest to know it's tall, Tom. And I don't need to be a method actor to recognize when someone's using it as an excuse. Hardy's expression remained calm, but there was something almost predatory in his composure now, like a chess master who had just seen his opponent make a fatal error. That's actually a perfect analogy, Joy. You're absolutely right that you don't need to climb Everest to know it's tall. But you would need to be a climber to criticize climbing techniques, wouldn't you? You'd need to understand rope work, oxygen systems, weather patterns. You'd need actual expertise, not just opinions. Are you saying I'm not qualified to have opinions? Joy demanded, her voice now clearly agitated. Not at all, Hardy replied smoothly. You're absolutely qualified to have opinions. But there's a difference between having an opinion and making authoritative statements about professional practices you've never engaged in. Surely someone with your experience in media understands that distinction. The other hosts were now visibly uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes was fidgeting with her cards, and Whoopi was giving the producers desperate looks off camera. This interview had gone completely off script, and Joy was clearly losing control of the situation. "You know what, Tom?" Joy said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think you're proving my point perfectly. All this intellectual posturing. This need to sound so serious and important. That's exactly what I'm talking about when I say method acting is pretentious." Hardy tilted his head slightly, and for the first time since the conversation began, he smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed exactly the opening they needed. "Intellectual posturing," he said quietly. "Joy, I've answered your questions directly and honestly. I've engaged with your criticisms thoughtfully. If that strikes you as pretentious, I think that says more about your comfort level with substantive conversation than it does about my character." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Joy's mouth opened and closed, clearly searching for a comeback. But for perhaps the first time in her television career, she seemed genuinely speechless. Hardy continued, his voice remaining calm and measured. "You asked me about method acting, and I explained it. You challenged my explanation. And I questioned your expertise to make that challenge. You called my response pretentious. And now I'm pointing out that dismissing thoughtful dialogue as pretentious might say something about your own limitations. At what point in this conversation have I been anything other than respectful and direct?" The camera operators were having a field day, capturing every moment of Joy's visible discomfort. Her usual confidence had evaporated, replaced by the look of someone who had started a fight they were rapidly losing. "This is ridiculous," Joy muttered, clearly flustered. "I'm trying to have a normal conversation here." "Are you?" Hardy asked, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Because from where I sit, it seems like you came into this conversation with a predetermined narrative. You wanted to paint method acting as pretentious nonsense. And when I offered a different perspective, you dismissed it without actually engaging with the substance. That's not a conversation, Joy. That's a lecture where you've decided you already know the conclusion." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Joy's face had gone through several shades of red, and you could practically see her scrambling internally for some way to regain control of the interview. The other hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. "Look, I think we're getting a bit off track here." Whoopi finally managed to interject, but Hardy wasn't finished. "Actually, I think we're exactly on track," he said, turning his attention briefly to Whoopi before focusing back on Joy. "Joy asked me about method acting, presumably because she wanted to discuss it. I'm simply trying to understand why she seemed so hostile to the concept without having any practical experience with it." Joy's jaw tightened. She clearly wasn't used to being analyzed on her own show, and her discomfort was becoming more obvious by the second. "I'm not hostile to anything. I just think some actors use method acting as an excuse to be difficult on set. Some actors probably do." Hardy agreed calmly. "Just like some talk show hosts probably use their platform to attack people they disagree with instead of having genuine discussions. Should we judge all talk show hosts by the worst examples?" The comparison hit like a sledgehammer. Joy's eyes widened, and for a moment she looked genuinely shocked that someone had just used her own logic against her so effectively. "That's completely different," she protested. But her voice lacked conviction. "Is it though?" Hardy asked, genuinely curious. "You're saying we should judge method acting by its worst practitioners?" "I'm suggesting we could judge talk show hosting by its worst practitioners. What makes one valid and the other off limits?" Sarah Haynes tried to jump in. "Maybe we could talk about your new project." But Joy cut her off again, clearly unable to let Hardy's challenge go unanswered. "You're twisting my words, Tom. I never said we should judge all method actors by the bad ones." Hardy's expression remained patient, but there was something almost educational in his tone now, like a professor correcting a student who hadn't done the reading. "Actually, Joy, your exact words were that method acting is pretentious nonsense and that actors use it as an excuse to behave badly. That sounds like a pretty broad generalization to me. Would you like me to have the producers replay the tape?" The offer to replay her own words clearly rattled Joy even more. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and you could see her realizing that every word of this conversation was being recorded for millions of viewers to see. "I think you're being deliberately obtuse," Joy said, her voice taking on a defensive edge that everyone in the studio could hear. Obtuse, Hardy repeated. And there was something almost amused in his voice now. Joy, I've been nothing but direct. You made claims about method acting. I question those claims. You attacked my questions as pretentious, and I pointed out that dismissing legitimate discussion as pretentious might reflect poorly on the person doing the dismissing. Which part of that strikes you as obtuse? Joy was clearly spiraling now. Her usual arsenal of interruptions, topic changes, and personal attacks wasn't working against someone who refused to be derailed and seemed genuinely interested in following each line of reasoning to its logical conclusion. You're playing word games? She accused. But even as she said it, you could tell she knew how weak it sounded. Word games? Hardy's eyebrows rose again. Joy, words are how we communicate ideas. If you're not comfortable with precise language, perhaps television isn't the right medium for you. The suggestion that Joy might not be suited for television, delivered in Hardy's matter-of-fact tone, was devastating. The other hosts audibly gasped, and you could see the production team off camera frantically gesturing to each other. Joy's face went pale, then flushed an even deeper red. How dare you suggest that I don't belong in television? I've been successful in this industry longer than you've been acting. Have you, though? Hardy asked. And the simple question carried more weight than a lengthy accusation. I mean, what exactly do you consider success? Because from what I can see, your approach to interviewing seems designed to generate conflict rather than insight. You ask loaded questions, interrupt guests when they try to give thoughtful answers, and then attack them when they don't respond the way you want. Is that really success, or is it just noise? The accuracy of Hardy's assessment was undeniable. Everyone watching could see that he had just described Joy's interview style with surgical precision. And the fact that he was demonstrating his point in real time by refusing to be interrupted or derailed made it even more powerful. I ask tough questions because that's what journalists do. Joy shot back, but her voice was shaking now. Journalists. Hardy's tone remained calm, but the single word carried enormous weight. Joy, when did you last break a story? When did you last do investigative reporting? When did you last do anything other than offer opinions about other people's work? Because what I'm seeing right now isn't journalism. It's someone who's built a career on being argumentative, trying to pick a fight with someone who won't play along. The distinction between journalism and opinion punditry was crystal clear, and Hardy had just highlighted that Joy was firmly in the latter category while claiming the credibility of the former. Whoopi made another attempt to save the situation. Tom, maybe we should. But Joy was past the point of being saved. Her pride was wounded. Her professional competence had been questioned. And she was facing the humiliating realization that she was losing an argument on her own show in front of millions of viewers. You know what? Joy said, her voice rising. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by some actor who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Actually, Hardy said quietly, you do have to sit there. This is your show. I'm your guest. You invited me here presumably to discuss my work, and now you're upset that I'm not playing the role you wrote for me in your head. But here's the thing, Joy. I'm not performing for you. This is a conversation between two adults. And if you can't handle that, maybe the problem isn't with me. The words hit like a final blow. Joy sat frozen for a moment, clearly processing the fact that she had just been completely outmaneuvered by someone who had never raised his voice, never been disrespectful, and never stopped treating her like a professional, even as he systematically dismantled her credibility. This is unbelievable, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. What's unbelievable? Hardy asked. That someone disagreed with you, that someone asked you to defend your positions instead of just accepting them, that someone treated your questions seriously enough to give you honest answers instead of promotional sound bites. Which part exactly is unbelievable to you? Quote, Joy's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. For someone who had built her entire career on always having something to say. The silence was deafening. Hardy leaned forward slightly, his voice becoming almost gentle. Joy, I came here to talk about my work. You decided to turn it into an attack on method acting. Presumably because you thought it would make good television, but when I engaged with your criticism seriously, you got upset. The question you need to ask yourself is this. Do you actually want to have conversations, or do you just want to perform anger for ratings? The question hung in the air like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Joy stared at Hardy, her breathing shallow, clearly struggling with the realization that she had no good answer. The perform anger for ratings comment had cut right to the heart of everything she had built her career on, and everyone in the studio knew it. That's not Joy started then stopped. I don't perform anything. I give my honest opinions. Do you though? Hardy asked, and his tone was almost sympathetic now, which somehow made it worse for Joy. Because it seems to me like you came into this conversation with a script attack method acting. Get me defensive. Create some drama for the highlight reels. But when I didn't follow your script, when I actually engaged with your questions seriously, you got frustrated. That suggests to me that the conversation itself was never the point. Joy's hands were visibly shaking now. She looked around the table at her co-hosts, clearly hoping for backup, but they were all avoiding eye contact. Even Whoopi, usually quick to defend her colleagues, seemed to be studying her notes with unusual intensity. I ask the questions that viewers want answered, Joy said weakly. Do they though? Hardy pressed gently. Do viewers really want to watch you attack guests? Or do you just assume they do because conflict gets ratings? Because I have to tell you from where I sit, this doesn't feel like journalism or entertainment. It feels like bullying. The word bullying hit Joy like a physical blow. Her face went completely white, and for a moment she looked genuinely stunned. No one had ever called her a bully on television before, and the accuracy of it was clearly devastating. I am not a bully, she whispered. But even she didn't sound convinced. Aren't you? Hardy asked. You use your platform to attack people who can't really fight back without looking bad. You interrupt them when they try to explain themselves. You dismiss their responses without actually listening to them. You make personal attacks when your arguments fall apart. What would you call that behavior if you saw it anywhere else? Joy's breathing was becoming more rapid. She was clearly having some kind of panic response as the full weight of Hardy's assessment sank in. Everything he was saying was true, and she knew it. And worse, millions of people were watching her realize it in real time. This is my show, she said desperately. I have a right to ask tough questions. Absolutely, Hardy agreed immediately. You have every right to ask tough questions, but I also have the right to give you tough answers, and your guests have the right to be treated with basic respect, even when you disagree with them. The problem isn't that you ask hard questions. Joy, the problem is that you seem to think asking hard questions means you shouldn't have to answer any. Sarah Haynes made one last desperate attempt to save the situation. Maybe we should take a commercial break. But Joy was beyond saving now. Something had broken inside her. Some carefully constructed wall between her public persona and her private self-doubt. No, she said, her voice cracking. No, I want to finish this, Tom. You think you're so smart, so superior. But you don't know anything about what it's like to work in this industry as a woman. You don't know what I've had to do to survive. Hardy's expression softened genuinely for the first time since the conversation began. You're absolutely right. I don't know what that's like. And I'm not trying to dismiss the real challenges you faced. But Joy, none of that justifies treating people badly. Being a woman in a tough industry is a reason to fight for better standards, not an excuse to abandon them. The compassion in his voice seemed to break something in Joy completely. Tears started forming in her eyes, and her professional mask finally slipped entirely. You don't understand, she said. And now she just sounded tired and defeated. If I'm not the tough one, if I'm not the one asking the hard questions, then what am I? What's my value? That's exactly the wrong question, Hardy said gently. Your value isn't in being tough or mean or confrontational. Your value is in being curious, in helping people understand complex issues, in creating space for genuine dialogue. But you can't do any of that if you're more interested in performing conflict than having conversations. Joy was crying openly now, and the cameras were capturing every moment. The other hosts looked mortified, clearly realizing that they were witnessing the complete breakdown of their colleagues' professional identity on live television. I can't do this anymore, Joy said suddenly, standing up from the table. I can't sit here and pretend this is working when it's not. Tom, you're right about all of it. And I hate that you're right. And I hate that you've made me see it. And I hate that I've built my whole career on being something that I'm apparently not very good at. The studio was dead silent, except for the sound of Joy removing her microphone. Hardy started to stand, clearly wanting to say something, but Joy held up her hand to stop him. Don't, she said. Don't try to make this better. Don't try to be nice about it. You came here to promote your work, and instead you've shown me and everyone watching exactly who I really am. And the worst part is you did it without being cruel. You did it by just refusing to play along with my game. She turned to face the camera directly, her makeup strewn with tears. but her voice steadier than it had been all morning. You know what, viewers, Tom's right. I've been performing anger for ratings. I've been treating guests like props in my personal drama instead of like human beings with something valuable to say, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of being the person who attacks people for having thoughtful responses to legitimate questions. Hardy was still standing, clearly torn between wanting to comfort her and respecting her space. Joy, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Because this is the first honest conversation I've had on this show in years. And it took a guest calling me out to make it happen. That's not journalism. That's not even good television. That's just sad. She looked around at her co-hosts, then back at the camera. I built my career on being the tough questioner, the one who wouldn't let anyone get away with anything. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that the point of asking tough questions is supposed to be getting good answers, not just creating drama. And Tom just spent the last 20 minutes showing me what that actually looks like. Whoopi finally found her voice. Joy, maybe we should discuss this off camera. All no, Whoopi. I'm done discussing things off camera. I'm done with the performance. I'm done pretending that being confrontational is the same thing as being brave. Joy turned back to Hardy. Thank you for showing me what I've become. I don't like it, but I needed to see it. Hardy nodded respectfully. For what it's worth, I think recognizing it is the first step toward changing it. Maybe, Joy said. But I can't change it here. Not in this format. Not with these expectations. Not with this version of myself that everyone expects to see. I need to figure out who I actually want to be before I can be that person on television. And with that, she walked off the set, leaving her co-hosts, her guest, and millions of viewers in stunned silence. Hardy slowly sat back down, looking genuinely shaken by what had just happened. Well, Whoopi said finally, clearly struggling to process what she had just witnessed. I guess we should go to commercial. As the cameras stopped rolling, Hardy sat quietly for a moment, then looked directly at the remaining hosts. I hope she's okay, he said simply. That took real courage, and that's how one of television's most confrontational personalities walked away from her career. Brought down not by scandal or controversy, but by someone who simply refused to let her avoid the consequences of her own questions. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to someone who built their career on performing anger is to treat them with the respect and honesty they've forgotten how to handle. What do you think? Did Joy deserve what happened to her, or should guests just play along with the show's format? Let me know in the comments below.